welcome to the Clifton Worley Show. This week we have Blake Wyland. What's up, Blake?
Oh, I'm just chilling out here in the shred shed, recording a podcast, which is something that I find myself doing quite often. So, yeah, it's good times.
Yeah, I just want to kind of here for a minute. I don't think you need much of an introduction with my listenership because I think most of my listeners are very aware of, well aware of the Tone Mob and your podcast and probably have listened. But I kind of wanted to dial back to I was uninformed when I got into this whole like podcast world of listening to the gear podcasts and stuff. And all I knew is there was this guy in the gear slum who had this picture of like a Les Paul Jr. up on, as his like Facebook profile pic. And
Mm-hmm.
I just thought that was like the most beautiful guitar. And I remember like commenting on that, and that's kind of how like I ended up like first interacting with you, is asking about that guitar and everything. But I literally, and this just shows like how naive I was. Like I had no idea like that you had a podcast as well at that point.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, it's their group. I wasn't gonna go in there and be like, "Hey, everybody, listen to my stuff." It's just like I have fun in that group and with those guys and that show and that community. Um, and so I just interact over there as just another listener because I am just another listener over there.
Yeah. Well, and then like I started to, and I didn't know this, but like guys like Leon and Justin, like are guys that you run with like in real life and have played in bands with those guys and so far like I I've met Justin and yourself at Naum,
Mm-hmm.
um, but just the interaction I've had with you guys, like I've had a really good time just bantering back and forth and communicating with you guys. And I'll probably ask you a little bit about that project in a minute
Okay.
as we get
Cool.
going. But I wanted to for those of I was thinking for those of my listeners who may be like me and know who you are, but kind of would like to hear about your story and how you got into this whole thing and kind of what your journey was like going from I'm sure just being like an average guitar player to venturing into guitar journalism or podcasting and kind of how that all just evolved for you.
Yeah, so well, I should say I'm probably and still am. I've for a long time been a below average guitar player, but that's part of why what I probably got me obsessed with gear is making all these weird sounds. But honestly, I don't know how far back you want to go, but it kind of started when Jess and Leon and we were playing in a band together, and we all started getting real serious about our gear. Um, Leon driving a lot of that, honestly. And I got really into it, probably a little more than the other two at first, and and just really went crazy, just buying pedals and researching, and that's everything I was doing. And I didn't, didn't really know much about social media. I didn't really know, much about any of that stuff. And I but thought Instagram was kind of interesting as a concept, so I made an account and I posted a picture of my 1965 Ampeg J12, and like random people that I didn't know started liking it and following me, and um, I was like, wow, this is weird, and and then I started thinking slowly, like I started figuring it out and started kind of seeing how the system worked, and started kind of building an Instagram presence and figuring out that that was a really powerful thing to do and a really cool thing to do. And then I thought, my natural progression was, man, I wonder if I could do a podcast around this stuff, because at the time there wasn't very many, and there weren't any interview-based ones that were currently active that I knew of. And so I thought, well, I'll just give it a try. I had been listening to Chasing Tone for a while at that point, and started dipping my toe into 60 Cycle, and I thought, well, I don't know, I'd give this a try. And then I was listening to like a businessy type podcast and heard about Ringer, because at first I was like, well, how am I going to do this? There's no way I can like fly to people, and the remote recording stuff at the time wasn't really that great. And so I by chance found Ringer, and I thought, well, this is perfect. This will let me record basically anywhere. And it worked okay. It's not perfect, but it does a decent job. And so that's what I've been using ever since. And I just started hitting people up. I just said, if your phone number is listed on the internet, like on your website, then I'm going to assume that you want me to call it. And so, I called Keeley and like called some of these guys real early on, and just said, hey, you want to do it? And I was shocked that a lot of them said yes. And so I did some episodes, and in the first day had a decent amount of downloads, like just because I had the Instagram presence, and because there just wasn't that many podcasts at the time. Mm-hmm. So it was like the first day or two, there was like 100 downloads, and I was like, what? Like my mind was blown. It didn't make any sense. Now looking back, it kind of does. And I just kept doing it, and I kept thinking, I think this can be a real thing. I think this can be at least a piece of the puzzle to like, I really want to get into this industry. I really like what I'm seeing. I really like talking about this stuff and doing this stuff. And so I just kind of thought, this could really be a thing. And so I started trying to explore ways to make it, feasible long term. And through that, I just discovered by talking to all these business owners that I had a knack for branding and social media stuff, and just ideas and different things to try that a lot of these companies just weren't thinking of. And it's not because I'm some genius or anything. It just is because I'm weird, I guess. I don't know. And so basically it all stems back to the podcast, because it was like that got me in contact with all these people, and then certain individuals, we kept talking and we kept talking and we kept talking until it was like, maybe I need to bring you on, as a consultant type role. And so that's what ended up being, letting me leave my job, was helping all these companies out with that end of things.
Yeah, well, I very well remember, and I don't know, clue me in, how long have you been doing the podcast?
The podcast itself has been going, you know what, I can't even, I should know this. I don't know what the date that the actual episode dropped. I do remember that first Instagram post went up on March 19th of 2015.
Okay, so about 3.5 years, yeah.
Yeah, so the podcast itself was probably 6-8 months after that, maybe.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, by that time there was a few thousand followers, and so I thought this seems like an appropriate time to launch the podcast. And so yeah, it's probably been 2.5 years, 2.5, 3 years for the podcast. But there was a big gap in 2017. I was working really hard at the day job, and I was working really hard for my clients, and there's like a 3-4 month gap where there just wasn't hardly any episodes. It was very sporadic. A lot of listeners probably remember that, and it was probably very annoying. But I just couldn't keep up
right.
everything, and so something had to give, unfortunately. But it's been 2018's been good. We've been very consistent in 2018, just like a podcast is supposed to be. So, yeah, I'm very excited about that.
Well, that's good, and I think I have a few questions, because I know that there are a lot of gear podcasts that have popped up since the time you've started, probably in the last year and a half, that have kind of spun off of being part of these communities, and I mean that's something that we're all aware of. But what would you say is the key to making it over time as a podcast?
Consistency is a big one because I definitely lost a lot of ground in those months. Like I had very like super steady momentum, and then my consistency dropped off, and everything didn't crash, but the momentum went away. I think there's probably a lot of people who think the podcast stopped. You know what I mean?
Mm.
I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that just don't listen anymore because they don't realize it's still a thing. Fortunately, we retained most people and are finally back to where we were with it. But I'm sure there's people that like, well, he didn't put up an episode for months. We figured he was dead or something. Like, it's just because a lot of people, just because they listen to the podcast, doesn't mean that they follow you on every kind of media. They might just listen to the podcast. And if there's nothing there, they may unsubscribe. So consistency is the big one. Like, figure out a schedule, whatever that is, and stick to it. Weekly seems to be pretty normal. That's what podcast listeners expect. But if you don't think you can do that, do bi-weekly and then add additional stuff when you can. But whatever the schedule is, stick to the schedule, because that is my biggest piece of advice for sure.
Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about the whole Tone Mob brand idea and where that came from.
That came from me trying to figure out a website name and an Instagram channel name, just because I thought, I was thinking maybe it would be a blog thing, and it is a blog and there's a little bit of that, but that's a very minor aspect of it. And I was just trying to figure out what to call it, and I recently rewatched The Godfather, and so that kind of just became what it was. And that's where that brand came from. In retrospect, like, based on all the different things I'm doing, I might have chosen a different name. Maybe it's okay. I think it's okay. But there's some other projects that I'm involved in that I can't unfortunately really talk about too much right now. But I think we got a much cooler and more in line with who I am brand name than Tone Mob. I think Tone Mob is cool, but it's not as good as it could have been knowing what I know now.
Gotcha. Well, one of my favorite things, of course, you're well known as kind of like a pizza aficionado, right? And and I love the I think there's one of the brand logos has got like the slice of pizza, the Tone Mob, and let's just take a detour right here and talk about pizza for a minute.
Okay, that's fine with me.
I mean, what's like your ideal slice?
So I have a lot of different. I really appreciate a lot of different styles of pizza. My go-to in my neighborhood is a little place called Mi Familia, and it's like an Italian wood-fired style pizza. Very, very good. But I really like a good New York style slice. Like, ever since going there, I'm like, I get it now. And I went in very skeptical. I was like, come on. Like, even just looking at some of them, I'm like, it looks like a slice of pizza. Like, what is everybody talking about? And so I went in there kind of with my guard up, thinking like, this is all going to be overrated. And I went to a couple places and was like, oh, no, I get it. There is something here. There's something about the New York slice that is really magical. So those are my favorite, like an Italian style, and then a good New York slice. That's what I like. And fortunately, I didn't think it was possible, but I found a really good slice shop here in Portland that like it's not 100% there, but it's 98% there, and some of that might be just the vibe of not being in New York. Mm-hmm. Like, honestly, the pizza is really good. It's called Scotty's Slice Shop, and I went there. I was like, oh, I heard this was really good. Got a slice and went, oh, I found my place to scratch the itch. This is wonderful. So that's kind of my favorite styles. But we make a home that's it's somewhat healthier, and I say somewhat because it's not quite as many carbs in it. it's still a huge calorie bomb though, so it's not exactly healthy.
Yeah.
But it's very high protein, and my sister made this crust that's like Parmesan cheese based.
Okay.
And those are really good. And we load those up with all kinds of good stuff, like like some like the fancy like uncured pepperoni and stuff, which sounds weird but is actually pretty delicious. And fancy salamis, and I usually cut up a huge like portobello mushroom and put it all over that. Different things, just like it's like that's the way to scratch the pizza itch, but not totally like just die from eating pizza all the time.
Yeah.
It's really really good, but it's still a calorie bomb. So I'm not going to say it's like healthy. It's just somewhat less guilty than regular pizza.
Yeah. I'm kind of the same way. Like I love pizza, but like I get to the point where it's like I'm gonna be pretty, full all the time if I approach pizza as much as I probably would like to.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But for me, I've found that I like to gravitate more towards like those that don't have the tomato sauce, and like maybe like just like a light olive oil base on it. That just to me is like it's less rich, seems like.
Yeah, I like those. It's not what if somebody ordered one and it was there for the group to eat, I would grab a slice of it. But it's not what I myself am gonna order. I'm pretty much, if I'm craving pizza, it's generally a red sauce pizza. I'm not a big barbecue chicken guy. Some people really like that, but I'm kind of like, if I want barbecue chicken, I want barbecue chicken. I don't want a pizza.
That's true. Yeah. Well,
that's my weird thing. And the same thing with taco pizzas. I like them, but at the same time, if I wanted tacos, I'd get tacos.
Yeah. But I like both of those pizzas. I want to ask you though, like, what are your thoughts on cheap pizza? Like, are you okay with cheap pizza?
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I don't. There again, because pizza's not good for you, right? Like, I'd love to say that pizza's a health food, but it's obviously not. So my thought is, like, if I'm gonna eat pizza, why not make it good? Like, if I can't afford the good one, then I'm gonna save that money and wait a couple weeks until I can afford the good one.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna treat myself, I'd like to treat myself. That said, Domino's is not nearly as bad as it used to be back in the day. Like 5 years ago, they really turned things around. It's not gourmet by any stretch, but you know what? It ain't the Domino's of old. It's much better than it used to be.
I agree. It's kind of like there's a local pizza place here that's like if I go get a to-go order, probably enough to feed my family. Like I'm gonna drop a big chunk of change,
right,
to get a good pizza. But like sometimes, I'm not beyond getting a Little Caesars hot and ready for $5, as long as it's hot and ready. And and taking care of dinner.
It says it right on the box.
I know. And it usually is only good as long as it's hot and ready, because otherwise it tastes like cardboard.
Yeah, Little Caesars. I haven't had a Little Caesars in a really long time. I am amazed that they can produce any kind of even semi-edible product for $5 that is that size. So that's pretty impressive. But beyond that, like that's where I go. I'm like, it's not very good for you, and if I want to eat something like that, I don't know. If I'm gonna eat bad for me food, I generally try to get better stuff. I'm not morally opposed to it though, and I definitely think there's a time and place.
Totally. Well, my cousin Tim wants to know, what is it like to be made of cardboard?
Oh, it's a rough time. I got a lot of creases in me. There's a little delamination that goes on over the years if no one properly takes care of you, Diaz. And it's not easy being cardboard, or so I'm told. No, Cardboard Blake isn't me though. I don't know who Cardboard Blake is. Could be anybody. I don't know.
Well, I met a man named Cardboard Blake at Summer Nam
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago. Um, and matter of fact, I think I can't. I'd have to do some searching, but I think there's like a video out there somewhere of me hanging out with Cardboard Blake in front of Eastside Music in Nashville.
That sounds familiar. I'm pretty sure I've seen that video. There's a
Yeah,
few people hanging out with cardboard over there. I'm pretty sure I've
yeah,
seen your face.
it's fun times, fun times. We enjoyed some barbecue, the best brisket I think I've ever had, and it was a good time.
Good times, good times. Yeah, I've still never met Cardboard myself. So, Cardboard Blake, he's a quite the character. Um, no, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, but for those that don't, that was a really cool thing that Jonathan Diaz, who's on the Effects Loop podcast, came up with. I've never been to Summer Nam. It's a bit of a, like, ironically, I've been to Nashville like just after or just before Summer Nam multiple times, but never during the right time. And so Jonathan Diaz came up with the idea to raise money to get a cardboard me printed and toted around Nam, and then all the additional that went to it we got to put towards a charity, which is we ended up choosing Joshua Spataro's his daughter's charity, and I wish my brain worked and I could remember the name of it, but if you look up Violet, it's his daughter, you'll find it, Violet Spataro. So anyway, that was really fun. It was a fun way to kind of give back to that charity and make me look like a big doofus. So, which I'm fine with.
Well, going to that episode, that I think that to me that was the most memorable, like, heartfelt episode that I ever listened to. That you put out, and I just absolutely loved that and his story, and it took a very unexpected turn, but it just really drew me in.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming. That's still the only episode that I've like. I don't know if it was audible, or not, but I was crying during that episode.
Yeah.
That was not expected, but I was definitely wiping away tears. I'm not sure if anybody could hear or if I said anything about it, but it was intense. So yeah, for anybody that wants to know, that it was the episode with Joshua from Righteous Sound Pickups, who makes awesome pickups and has awesome story to tell. So
Yeah.
That was intense.
Yeah, I encourage anybody listening, go check that out. It's a great episode if you haven't listened to it already.
His pickups are truly wonderful, though. I've got 2 guitars coming with his pickups, which I'm really stoked on.
Nice.
So, just so anybody knows.
Yeah, I would love to actually try out a set of his. Now, didn't he work? He worked for like one of the big pickup makers, didn't he?
He worked for Lawler for a while.
Lawler, yeah.
For quite a while, I think. I can't remember the exact amount of time, but he was there for a decent amount of time.
Awesome. Well, I want to ask about Anchor Ashore and kind of if you'll talk about that project a little bit.
Okay, yeah. So that was a band. Is a band, sort of, kind of. We haven't played together in quite a while, just because of schedules and whatnot. But basically, we were friends that had recorded music together off and on throughout the years. Some of the guys in the band, a good chunk of the band is not really involved in the online guitar community, because one's a drummer and the other's a bassist, and there's just a variety of reasons. But so nobody really knows them, but they're great dudes, and we'd been playing together for quite a while, and we were like, we need to make a record, and we didn't want to do any covers. We mostly were playing covers when we would play together, but we just sat down, and Leon and I did most of the songwriting. It's almost a 50-50 split on that record. That wasn't really intentional, it's just kind of how it worked out. And yeah, we just buckled down and wrote some songs, and then we'd go jam, once every couple weeks, and we'd work the songs out a little further and work them out a little further, and then we kind of took a vacation. Some guys go hunting for a while, for a couple weeks. Some guys go, to Disneyland, whatever the case may be. We decided to go into the recording studio. So we all scheduled the time off work. We spent, I think, 5 days. I think I took like a week off total, or I can't remember how it all worked out. But we spent almost a week in the studio straight, recording these songs, and we got 99% of the material recorded in those sessions, and they were long. Like we got there, at a decent time in the morning, and we stayed. Sometimes there were 14, 16-hour days or longer, and it was a really intense process, but we had a lot of fun at the same time, and it was a really fun project, and I've been getting the songwriting bug again. I think what it's going to take for me is to have another goal like that. Like there was a goal there. Like we want to record a record this year. And so then it was like, okay, my brain went into songwriting mode, and I've never wrote that many songs that quickly. And it's not an impressive amount of output by any stretch of the imagination. It's just able to have some songs that I don't hate that quickly it made me happy. And Leon's songs are awesome, and I think it came together really well, and I'd like to do it again. I just feel like I need to get that motivation again, which is a little bit difficult. But yeah, that's kind of the nutshell. One funny story. When we were playing together initially, we were playing like a lot of punk covers and a lot of '90s covers and stuff. And we're like, what are we gonna call ourselves? And the bassist he cut the logo out of a bag of Gravy Train dog food and stuck it on the wall. He's like, we're Gravy Train. And so for a long time we were calling ourselves Gravy Train, like up until like literally even during the recording we were calling ourselves Gravy Train. But like we all kind of knew this is kind of serious, like not like serious in that we're gonna be a band and we're gonna go tour and stuff, but serious in like we seriously mean this music. Like this isn't a joke band, and that was kind of a joke name. So we really had to put our heads down and try to figure out. We went through a lot of names, and most of the ones that we loved were taken. And so we settled upon a part of a Thrice lyric. We're all Thrice fans in the band, and the lyric is, "How can I leave when my anchor's ashore?" And so that's where we got the name, which we all really liked.
Yeah, that's a really cool name, I think.
I don't remember if there. I mean, it's hard to say who came up with it, because I think that it might have been me, but it doesn't really matter because we just had a text thread or an email thread or something going where we were just spitballing like huge lists of names, and it'd be like, yep, nope, yep, nope. It was funny that the record was done and we were still trying to figure out what to call ourselves.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Somebody here asked, what are your favorite songwriters? I think Will LaHoo said that.
My favorite songwriters. Well, let's see. I mean, one's really easy. Dustin Kensrue of Thrice is obviously one of my favorite songwriters. I think his lyrics are among some of the best. They're very poetic, and I really like how literally the word choices he used. The melodies and the songs are all really strong, but he's a really brilliant lyricist, in my opinion. Jason Isbell, I think, is one of the best songwriters ever.
That's a good one.
I'm pretty sure. And in that vein, Sturgill Simpson. Really like Sturgill a lot. I'm a big Sturgill nerd. I really like his stuff. Waylon Jennings is probably one of my favorite artists ever, and I think he's got a lot of good songs. He's probably not one of the best songwriters ever, but he does have some of the ones he wrote are pretty awesome.
I feel the same way about him. I feel like he had some songs he hit out of the ballpark. but
Yeah.
his if you look at his career, it wasn't as prolific as maybe like Willie Nelson or somebody like that who
Willie would be
wrote a
another
string of
one
hits. Yeah,
for me, obviously.
yeah.
Yeah, big fan of that stuff.
But the
Um,
songs he did write, I think, that were hits were just amazing.
yeah, and then in that same kind of vein, Merle Haggard is a big one for
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
Um, those are guys that I grew up listening to, and the punk and hardcore stuff kind of came later. And now that as I've gotten older, I appreciate. I mean, I've never not liked like outlaw country and good country music. I've always liked it. Um, but now I like it even more. I think, like, I just really, I really like that music.
yeah. I think that's the thing is like when we like are growing up and stuff, like we tend to like try to pigeonhole like what kind of style we like because it like I had this conversation with Gabriel Tenorio when he was on the show, and it was like it's very common for like teenagers to I play this kind of music, and that's kind of like their whole social circle, and everything's the kind of bands they're playing, everything has that sound, and like when you get older, you realize no, like before that I like this kind of music, or you know, um, and like you realize it's okay to be diverse and like something that's country and punk on the other side, and it doesn't have to all be one thing.
Oh, totally. And I was very much guilty of that. When I was a teenager, it was like if it isn't fast, like well, it doesn't have to be fast, but if it isn't aggressive, then I basically don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's not even true because like I would still like tap my toe to country songs when they would come on. Like I still clearly liked it, but I wasn't like wearing a Waylon Jennings t-shirt or anything. Like I had a bunch of punk bands and a bunch of metalcore bands that I liked, and that was like part of my identity. I am that guy. This is what I like. These are the shows I go to, and this is my thing. And as I got older, it was like that's dumb. It's not even a fun thing to like. All those bands are great. The ones that I really liked, I pretty much still like. But it's like no, there's all this good stuff out there. Like why are we pigeonholing? Like, and I think it's dumb. And now to this day, like Careless Whisper is one of my favorite songs. I don't care. Like it's a great song.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
like bring on the George Michael. I don't care. It's good. If it's good, it's good.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I couldn't agree more. I want to ask you about. I think I heard you mention this at some point on the Tone Mob, like on the group in the discussion. And the thing was that you're kind of known as like being a big Les Paul fan, right?
Yeah.
And but you had mentioned a story about your dad and how he played guitar, and if I'm being correct now, I could be just jumbling up some things, but that he was mainly like an acoustic player.
Yeah, that's correct. That's still the case. He's got a bunch of acoustics, and I have one acoustic that I don't really play because it's not a great one, but has a lot of sentimental value.
Well,
Um,
I want to ask you then, kind of how was that in the background, and how was that decisive for you, and kind of where you went guitar wise, and what was on the background there, and the influences you had.
yeah, so part of the thing is like my dad is he's more talented than me in the songwriting and stuff. Even though won't admit it, and he hasn't technically wrote as many songs as I have, but the ones he has wrote I think are better. And he's just I don't know. I think he's more talented than me. He's a much better vocalist. And anyway, but he always played acoustic, and because pretty much all the songs that he liked to play sounded good on an acoustic. And I was listening to all these metal bands and punk bands and metalcore bands. A lot of that doesn't work on an acoustic guitar. Like you can't do a good hardcore breakdown on an acoustic guitar Now somebody's gonna correct me and send me a clip of something.
Yeah.
But like, you know, I was like, I want to play this heavy music, and Dad literally didn't know. He had no idea how to get those sounds. He just didn't. He never played any of that stuff. And so I had to kind of try to figure out on my own how to even get a distortion sound. You know, I tried it with my, this is the acoustic I was talking about. I had an acoustic electric, and I plugged it in and turned the gain up, like trying to figure out how to get, you know, a distorted tone out of it. And it was like just feeding back and all this nonsense. So the Les Paul love really came from a lot of bands I liked played Les Pauls. And for graduation, my parents got me a Les Paul, and I played that thing for years. It was my only guitar, and I just played the heck out of it, and just grew really accustomed to Les Pauls, and always was lusting after a white Les Paul custom with gold hardware. And ironically, even though this wasn't necessarily my favorite band, I think that their album, The Black Parade by My Chemical Romance, is like a fantastic, like, classic rock record, even though it's kind of pigeonholed into the emo category.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that made me really want a white Les Paul custom, was Frank Iero smashing one in a music video. I found out later that it was an Epiphone, which I hadn't caught on to at the time. But
Yeah.
that doesn't matter. For years, like, that is the coolest thing, and I want one. And so I just always wanted one. I didn't get one until like last year, because all the ones I played were stinkers. I couldn't find a good one, and finally found a good one last year, and that was like a childhood dream guitar kind of realized, which was kind of fun. I don't know. The Les Paul for me just really works, but
Now I think the one that was in that
why.
picture that you had for so long, that was a Junior, like a Tobacco Sunburst.
So that Junior's my number one guitar. That is my, if there's a burning building,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get that guitar. That belonged to my grandfather.
Nice.
That's I think I've told this story like a million times, but it's a 1955 Les Paul Junior that he had in the closet, and he was watching Antiques Roadshow one time, and he was like, that guitar showed up, and he's like, you know, I've got one of those. And he went to the closet and was like, and then he came back out and he's like, oh, that's worth some money.
Good grief.
And so, and he just kind of put it back in the closet, and then he was telling me that story, and I'm like, I didn't know you had that. And I didn't really know that much about vintage guitars at the time. I'm still not an expert, but I know quite a bit more than I did. And he's like, yeah, you want to see it? And I pulled it out, and I'm like, oh man, this thing it's got it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But it needed a little bit of work, as a lot of them tend to do over the years. The bridge pins kind of get pulled forward on them and stuff. So I was like, he was like, I don't know where to get this fixed at. And he could play guitar. He played his acoustic semi-regularly. I was like, I know, I'll figure it out. And so I took it and got it fixed. And then he was like, that's awesome. He's like, why don't you just keep it then? I'm like, what? like whoa,
Yeah.
what? And so that was actually my second electric guitar, was the Junior. And yeah, it's definitely my number one for obvious sentimental reasons. Also, it's such a fantastic guitar. It really does play awesome.
Yeah, it's an amazing looking guitar, and I just wish in my family, you know, I come from like a third generation of playing guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and I wish in my family, like, my grandfather would have bought guitars like that in the 50s.
Yeah, I think he bought this in the 60s off of a guy, like the early 60s. Yeah. And he played it a little bit. He was primarily a piano player, though.
Okay.
But he had that, and he had two Fender Champs from the kind of that era, too. He had a 1961 and a 1956. And so I've got the 61, and Dad has the 56. So, yeah, he had some great old vintage stuff that he didn't really realize what he had, but fortunately he never messed with it over the years, like some people end up doing when they don't know what they have.
Yeah. No, that's Awesome.
But he still could play. He just primarily played piano.
Mm.
I grew up sitting on his lap while he played piano for me. It's a big memory.
Did he happen to play? You mentioned the country music. Is that something that he and your dad played?
They never really played together, at least not as far as I know. My grandpa played, he played a lot of stuff. He wrote a little song about me when I was a little kid, and then he played some old kind of hymns and things like that. But when I was a kid, I didn't always know what he was playing, so that's hard for me to pinpoint. And he
Yeah.
a little bit less as he got older.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I remember, and my grandfather wasn't an accomplished musician, but he always would play guitar, and he had an old Silvertone that's laying around somewhere from the 50s or 60s. That
Oh,
was his
sweet.
main guitar, yeah. And but I have that memory too. Like my grandfather, he knew how to chord on piano, and he would go around playing gospel songs and things like that. And it it seems like that generation, like I didn't ever appreciate it much as a young man, but that really resonated with um, that generation, some of those songs. And now that I hear those, it's actually I can get pretty emotional listening to some of those songs.
Yeah, for sure. It. I don't know. I think they have some weight to them and some meaning to them. Even if that's not what you practice, I think you could probably get behind them and appreciate
Yeah,
what they're trying to say.
right. The just the effort behind them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to shift gears here for a minute
Okay.
and ask about kind of you've been co-host on the Chase and Tone podcast
Mm-hmm.
some, and I wanted to ask. I know kind of you went on this journey where you started your own podcast and kind of took off, but what did it feel like to be like the co-host on like a show that got you into that whole world?
It was interesting. It wasn't quite as weird. It was weird, but it wasn't quite as weird as one might think, because it ended up being a somewhat natural progression for me, rather than being sort of an abrupt shift like it probably seemed to the listeners. Um, After Brian did my show, we started talking on the regular, like very regularly, just talking on the phone and just chatting about things. And no, for everybody that's wondering, a lot of people ask me this. I don't work for Brian, at least not currently. A lot of people think I do. I do not work for him. So, uh, um, but we just talk all the time, and when he was getting ready to wind down that show, he was like, or he didn't tell me about it, but I heard this is going to be our last show. And so I texted him and I was like, last Chasing Tone? He's like, yeah, I don't really want to stop doing it, but I can't figure out a format that makes sense, with these guys leaving. So, just I guess we're just going to be done with it. And I was like, well, you really should keep it going, because as a listener, I didn't really want it to go away. I was like, you should try to figure something out. A lot of people in the industry, and he's like, well, why don't you come on for a couple episodes and we'll see what happens. And so I was like, well, okay. At this point, I'm already used to talking to Brian. That wasn't new.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did a few episodes, and then about 120 episodes later, I'd realized I'd done a lot of Chasing Tone podcast episodes, and we're still doing it. So it was a little bit of an accident, but at the same time, it was it was a more natural progression than maybe it sounded like to the listeners, because it was just like, we're done. Just kidding. We're back with this other random guy. you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was for me and Brian, we'd already been used to talking on the phone for hours at a time, so that wasn't new to us.
Yeah. Well, let's fast forward kind of today. So you were talking about that you left the the field you were in, and what was that, by the way?
I was actually in the oil industry for that job. I was a heavy equipment mechanic for a long time, and then I was in the oil industry, and now here I am. So my background is not anything like what I've ended up doing, like at all. It's kind of crazy.
And that's interesting. From a lot of the guys that I've talked to have found themselves like in the gear industry some way, like that wasn't like really their original path for a lot of guys. It just kind of like happened somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I mine is a little bit different because I definitely started like with it, not like the first, not immediately, but really quickly. I was like, I want to get in this business. Let's figure out how to do it, type of thing. Which might sound crazy to some of the veterans in the industry because they're like, it's a hard business to be in. But I'm like, but I love this stuff. This is, this is great. Like getting to talk about gear all day and like figure out these problems and work through these situations. Like this is fun to me. It's work. It definitely is, but it doesn't feel like it. I don't get up and go, yeah,
Yeah.
like I used to.
Yeah.
And I really don't take that for granted because I did that for a lot of years. So it's a grind, but there's worse grinds. That's for sure.
Sure, sure. Well, let me ask you this, if you don't mind being candid. Looking back now that you've got the looking back in hindsight, what do you think the impact of the media slash podcast slash music journalism, how's that affected the market today, and what do you think we're looking at going forward?
Oh, I think it's been a huge driver of things. I mean, for instance, there's a reason that I haven't got a clear pronunciation on this yet. I haven't figured out how to say it, but I think it's Tamon in Germany. There's a reason that like part of the reason they dominate is because they like own all the media over there.
Interesting.
So they're very hyper aware of like, having they don't own all German media. They have a massive amount of control over the music gear journalism over there. From what I gather, I've never experienced this myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that tells me like this stuff is all really important. There for a long time, how did anybody find out about anything? They were reading Guitar Player magazine or Premier Guitar. Like that's the only way. There was no other way to do it. So the new media that's kind of came around, I think, well, A, has really sort of upset that a little bit. But B, I think it's super important. I think it's super important for brands to be very active on their own channels, and I think it's really important for the older media companies to try to adapt a little bit to the new ways. I think in this business and in most consumer businesses, the media is everything. Like how everything is presented makes you decide on whether or not you want to buy a thing, whether you know it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And marketing done well, and when I say that, I mean like you're solving a problem for somebody and are able to tell them about it in a way that is pleasing to them. I think that's the whole industry, and podcasts are part of that. Instagram's part of that. Facebook, like all these brands really need to look at their channels and figure out a strategy. I think it's so important.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly I feel like that a lot of the podcasters can be part of a bigger, better gear world.
Mm-hmm.
And it can have some positive influence. I've already seen that with some like kind of the outing of some of the old like outdated ways, and like a newer generation is not all of them are listening to podcasts, but maybe YouTube channels, and there's a lot of media outlets that people are gravitating towards making the decisions, and there's a lot of people who just like yourself and some of the others who have become influencers in the industry, because of just having this exposure to this gear, talking about it, and being willing to cover it, versus used to be it was kind of like if Guitar Player magazine or somebody like that covered it, you knew about it, or maybe like musician. For me, as a teenager when I was growing up, almost 20 years ago now, like the biggest deciding factor was what was being printed in the musician's friend catalog that got mailed to you.
Oh yeah, me too, totally. What was I seeing? Because if you didn't see it, it didn't exist, essentially. Like, it really doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing now. But I do think that means that guys like you and me doing this, we're still the underdogs by a long stretch in the media sense of things. But I do think that means that in order to stay relevant and like be a positive voice in the industry, we have to be really careful with we have to be really careful not to just like take the low hanging fruit. You know what I mean? As somebody who like puts in a lot of work on this thing, I know you know what I'm talking about. Like, if some schmo company, like some sort of industry equipment supply company wanted to come along and sponsor the show, with their track record, it might be kind of tempting if they're like, here's a couple grand, if you just want to sponsor the show. But you and I both know we couldn't do that.
Right.
It would be tempting. It'd be like, oh yeah, I'd like to pay my mortgage with that. That'd be great. But at the same time, and I totally inflated that number. That is not the going rate for Guitar Podcast sponsorship,
no,
by the way.
No.
I was just spitballing. It would be like, oh yeah, you have to be really careful about who you work with. I guess that's what I'm saying. And sometimes, I'm not saying that you can always get it right every time, but we just basically need to believe in what we're saying when we say something. If not, we're going to lose credibility. And if not, the podcast as a whole lose credibility.
Yeah.
If a company wants to sponsor it, then I feel like I've always told people, like, I need to know. If I didn't know about them, I need to know about them before I can say anything definitively.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the tone mafia. I mean, you gotta vet these guys. They gotta be made men.
Exactly. I mean, if they're not, we gotta take their knees. It's just how it works. All that to say, it probably was a long-winded way of saying it. Like, I think everybody needs to be careful about who they work with, because that's the difference between us and some of the older media. Mm-hmm. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, there's that pitfall there kind of hanging over us, and it's like, if you don't learn from history.
That said, if Coca-Cola wants to start throwing money at me, you're going to hear about Coca-Cola. I'm just saying.
Well, but yeah. Talking about Coca-Cola, Adam Rohr wanted to know what your favorite beverage was.
My favorite beverage?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's tough. I pretty much only drink water, a little bit of coffee, and I like good craft beer, and cider. So there's not. I really like. Probably my favorite stuff is like really weird breweries doing weird hipster type things. I like really big imperial stouts and barley wines and things like that, and double and triple IPAs, and just interesting things like that are like that you have to kind of think about them while you're tasting them. I really like that.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
How do you approach your coffee?
I'm not as big of a snob with my coffee. I barely know anything about it. I just do black coffee, dark roast, call it a day. And I don't drink nearly as much coffee as I used to. I've been able to adjust my sleep schedule mostly to a favorable one for me, so I don't find that I need quite as much caffeine to get me through the day. So I don't really drink coffee that often. In fact, last time I had coffee, it had been a few weeks, and I was wired, and I've never been wired off coffee before. I was like, whoa, this is weird. My tolerances went in the toilet for coffee. So I drink a little bit of coffee here and there, but I'm not too picky. I just don't put any cream or sugar in it, basically.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Like the coffee thing. Like I used to drink so much that I probably was running off of it, and like I realized no, like just sleep is good. and and I've learned that once you get over the like withdrawal headaches and stuff, it's a lot better just to drink one or two a day, and you know.
Yeah, see, I've never experienced that. Um, I never have had the caffeine withdrawals. I did though when I was a kid, like poison myself with caffeine,
Hmm.
not to an actual dangerous level, but I could drink a superhuman amount of caffeine as a teenager and go right to sleep whenever I wanted. Like
Hmm.
it didn't make any sense. Yeah, it would be like me on methamphetamines if I tried to do that now. Um, but I drank two of those red line energies. Have you seen those? The ones you're only supposed to drink half a bottle of.
No, I haven't seen that.
Well, stay away from them. They're not any good. They taste awful. But man, do they have they? I don't know what they have in them, but it was like I was like, whoa, like way wired. And that was when I had a pretty decent caffeine tolerance. But by that night, I was throwing up. It was a bad deal. So
Oh,
stay away
that's
from.
terrible.
Yeah, don't go near that stuff. It's not good for you at all. And it really didn't do me any good. I didn't
Yeah.
get any more done. I just ran around in circles all day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of a good cup of black coffee, and it used to be dark roast for me, but I've learned that sometimes the lighter roasts have some flavor profiles that really just they're not bad too, and so I think I landed on like Ethiopian coffee. Now I don't get that all the time because it's a little spendy to always have that at the house,
Right.
but Ethiopian like I think the term is single source or whatever, single origin.
Yeah.
That to me is like my favorite.
I'm gonna need to experiment with my coffee a little bit. I'm a little bit boring with my coffee.
It's good stuff. Stumptown. There's a few places around here in the area like I can go and get it, and I think that's a Portland-based company, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely a Portland thing for sure.
but I love their stuff. I've had the Ethiopian. I've had I think some Nicaraguan, and it's really consistent and like like if you get it like it's gonna be good.
Nice. Nice.
Well, let me ask you about of course you're friends with Leon, and he came out with that iconic fuzz pedal a few years back.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of what was that like being like there seeing that? Did you have any part in that? And I don't know. I just want to kind of pick your brain about that.
Yeah, so the Pelotar is kind of interesting. That was spawned from I was driving home, and this is like after Tone Mob had been a thing for a little bit. Um, I was driving home and I had a silly idea. I was like, and Leon had been thinking about making pedals. He'd built a few kits here and there, and um, I was like, dude, you need to build a fuzz pedal, like a gnarly fuzz that looks like a clone. And he's like, that's a great idea. I think that's hilarious. Um, and I was just thinking, like, make a Big Muff clone or a Wild Fuzz Face or a Univox Super Fuzz or something just gnarly. And he took it and went a whole different, like, actually made a really, that the three knob limitation was part of the design. Like, he's like, I gotta make it look like a clone, so it's gotta only have three knobs. How can I get the most control out of these three knobs? And that's where he come up with a very complicated, like fuzz circuit. Like this thing is not, it's not just your average fuzz. It's really, really well thought out. And he's like, I'm gonna do this. I'm like, that sounds hard. He's like, yeah, I can do it though, and he totally can. He's always a wizard with that kind of stuff. When he puts his mind to something, it generally happens. It generally happens fairly quickly. So yeah, I had a small part in it. I basically just kind of inspired him to make with the idea, and he kind of ran with it. And then we kind of planned, him and I sort of planned the launch out so that it was on April Fool's Day, and like he did most of the heavy lifting, but we talked about it a lot.
That's that. I think that was an incredible idea, and I can vouch for like the whole. I finally got to play one. I'm like late to the party on everything, but I finally got to play one when I went out to Tracy, California this summer. I went with Co up to his one day show,
Mm-hmm.
and he has one out on the road that he goes and does those. And there was a guy, and we're trying to be a little pitchy, trying to get people to try things, and there was a guy who that was like the very first thing he said was, "Oh wow, you got a pedal. It looks like a claw in there," and getting getting his reaction, and then and seeing the guy play it, and it did it for me. I was like, there's something truly special about like the whole, not just the sound of the pedal, but like the whole package.
Yeah, and I don't know, I wasn't there, so it's a little bit hard for me. I mean, I trust the people that told me the story, but it's still hard to know. Like, Bill Finnegan seen it in Grant's boutique Stomp Boxes Expo thing he does at the Summer NAMM.
Yeah, yeah.
Grant from Big Ear.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, super.
and
super
Bill
chill guy.
seen it, and he was, Grant, so chill, super chill. He seen. Bill seen, this is all secondhand information, so if I get this story a little bit wrong, I'm sorry. But what I'm told is Bill seen it and he was not happy because Bill does not like the clone craze, for obvious reasons. But he seen it and he's like, huh, and I think he made some remarks about it or something, and then I believe it was Grant went out of his way, was like, no, Bill, this is not what it looks like. I know what it looks like, but it's not a clone. And he's like, and they were like, what? He's like, yeah, no, it's a fuzz. Like, check it out. And then he thought, I heard through the grapevine, he thought that was hysterical. So, whether that's all 100% correct or not, I'm not sure because I wasn't there. But
Right.
that's the story.
Now that's what good legends are made of, right?
Yeah, exactly, totally.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll close out on this one last question. What's your favorite tacos, and how does that delve into burritos, and your thoughts on that?
Oh man, this is a great topic. So, I've heard some rumors. I heard that Bob Taylor says that tacos are better closer to the border, and I think that theory makes a lot of sense. It does, and I think maybe per capita, there's more. The tacos are better closer to the border. That's just a good theory. However, in my experience, that's not been the case. We're pretty far north of the border up here, and right about 3 miles from my house, there's a little Mexican place called Mitzel, and it ran by an older Mexican lady named Luz, and I've been going there since I was about. Well, I know I went there and ate for my 16th birthday because I just got my license, but we ate there before that, so I've been eating there for a very long time. And I'm telling you, she makes the best chorizo in the world, and her chorizo tacos are absolutely phenomenal. And so I mean, maybe it's true, on a wide scale, but I know I got a little gem here in my neck of the woods that I can't seem to beat. She makes the chorizo is just mind-blowingly good to me. Yeah. So those are my favorite tacos that I've had. And how does that delve into burritos? Well, I mean, I love chorizo. I always try to get, if chorizo is an option, that's what I shoot for. But I do appreciate the big old gut bomb al pastor burritos too. So it's really hard for me to pick a favorite burrito. There's so many different ones and I like for different reasons. It's a tough. I like lingua. I think I said that right. I hope I did. Which is the tongue. I think that's pretty delicious. Yeah, but all in all, chorizo is my favorite Mexican style meat, and so I try to get it as often as I can.
I love some chorizo, especially like there's this place I used to live a couple hours from here, and they had this like fajita plate where it was like chorizo and shrimp and steak and chicken, like everything. Like it was like surf and turf and ska, and and it was and the chorizo like held it all together in my opinion. Like that was the flavor profile that just just set it off.
Yeah, I kind of want some now.
Yeah, so we hopefully we're helping the chorizo business as well as the guitar industry here.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, there's one thing that I like more than Guitar Gear, and that is food. I love food. I love making food. I love eating food. I love going out to eat. I'm a big fan of food.
Me too.
Totally. I don't know. It probably shows a little bit because I like food, and so that's what happens sometimes.
Yeah, we well, it all gets the best of us. I said that was my last thing, but I have one last question.
Oh, keep going. We're good.
What are some of the maybe comical things now as you think about instead of Tone Mob, some of the other ideas that you had, names for the show, as iconic as that is now?
Oh, I can't really remember. And the show, you got to keep in mind, the show wasn't really. And I honestly don't remember a lot of them. It was all that same concept. It was like tone nuts and gear junkies and things like that. It was all very general gear-based things. I really don't remember any of the other ones because they were all like not very good. So I just said, nah, never mind. I don't know why I settled on Tone Mob. It has to have been because I was just watched The Godfather or something. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I can't remember that. I can't remember any of them. But it was all that same kind of concept.
Yeah. Well, I think if podcasts ever got syndicated, that would be like the perfect like name for it all.
Oh, that's a good. The Tone Mob Network. That's true.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, that'd be like, well, a friend of a friend over here is doing this podcast.
Yeah, that sounds. I mean, I would not be against that at all, but I wouldn't be the biggest show in the network if that happened. So I don't know if that would make any sense.
No, it'd just be fun to kind of delve into that whole, El Costa Nostra, theme.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, totally. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've been meaning to do this a really long time, and I don't know why I haven't sooner, but I'm just stoked to have you on, and can't wait for our listeners to, kind of hear some of the things you had to say tonight.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm still like, I still can't my family helps out with this as well. I still am like, can't believe that people want to listen to this. You know what I mean? Not your show, but
right.
Me talking like what? Like most people in my family try to ignore me as much as possible because as you can tell, I'm a talker, and so that doesn't stop when the mics turn off. Like I'm still blabbering about something, and so most of my family's like, yeah, Blake, yeah, okay, yeah, he's talking. What do you know? Blake's talking again, and so it's crazy to me that like people want to listen. And so, anybody that's listening to this, you made it this far through, so I'm impressed. But, I really appreciate it, though. It's not lost on me that it's connecting with people, and I really am glad that it is, and I hope that it continues to. So thank you to all the listeners, all the Tone Mob listeners, and all the Clifton Whirly Show listeners.
Yeah, which I think there's probably, I would say a 99% chance that all of my listeners probably found their way to my show through either your show or one of those in our network of friends, and so but I know that a lot of our listeners do listen to your show and has followed it for what. Matter of fact, I've had several tell me I was in Tone Mob and then I came to this group and then I found you, and so there's a lot of there's a lot of just that interaction in our community kind of is just very fluid.
Oh yeah, totally. And it is interesting too. Like I know that like a lot of my listeners listen to 60 Cycle, and I know a lot of 60 Cycle's listeners listen to me, and Gear Slum and this show. Like all of these kind of effects loop guys, like all of these kind of connected groups, they all basically have a lot of crossover. But what I find interesting is the everyone has their own vibe. Like people will post things like, I feel like this belongs here, like in this group, even though like there's 30+% of the same people in some of these groups. There's definitely individuals that aren't, but with the amount of crossover, it's just entertaining to me, like how each show and each platform sort of has its own voice and vibe, and people respond to it appropriately for the most part.
And I think it's beautiful. You'd think this kind of piggy tails on something we said earlier, but and rather is there's so much market share to go around. I believe that the market and the listenership could just keep growing as the market. Hopefully, the gear market will grow, and that there will be more stories to tell and more voices in that, in that choir to kind of step up and take their place.
Well, to me, honestly, the biggest problem for us as podcasters isn't necessarily that the gear market needs to grow, although I would like to see that as well.
Yeah.
It's really the awareness of gear podcasts needs to grow, and totally. we all push as hard as we can on that. But I think what it's going to take is for a major, outlet like Reverb maybe, or Premier Guitar did it, but they didn't ever really talk about their podcast. Like podcast listeners found the Premier Guitar podcast, but I didn't see much promotion on Premier Guitar's end for it.
Yeah.
I could be naive to some of it, but it really didn't look like they did. I'm on their mailing list. I've never been emailed about the Premier Guitar podcast that I can remember. So, I think it's going to take an entity like that wants to push a podcast that will. I think that is definitely we're all so early into this that I think that will be a rising tide raises all ships type of situation. Like the bigger Keeley gets, the better it is to some degree for the smaller builders, because then people become aware that boutique effects are a thing.
Totally.
And if Reverb, for instance, did a podcast, like it would be great if they would like throw some muscle behind it, because it was like then people would be like, oh, Reverb has a podcast. I wonder what other guitar podcasts there are. I think you would get a long tail effect out of that.
I think the platform is very, very niche, and it's a really cool place, but it definitely has room for growth and exposure, like wider across that gear, whether it's about gear or music or whatever. But like, I think the acceptance of podcast across, forms of media, like it could be a bigger medium.
I think so. I think people, it is large, and a lot of people listen to podcasts. I think it's only going to get larger. Like, it's still kind of, podcasts are still, not everyone listens to podcasts. Maybe everyone under, 27 listens to a podcast, or 33. But I don't think that, I don't think it is, a mainstream thing, the way YouTube is. YouTube is pretty much mainstream media at this point.
Yeah.
And on podcasts are still niche, and I think it's just because it's a little bit harder. It's not hard, but you have to do a little bit of legwork to figure out how to listen to podcasts still. Or YouTube, you just click on YouTube and there's stuff to watch.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. And, it'd be interesting to see what happens. I often wonder, and I've asked this but with other podcasters before, but if the medium fell out, the bottom fell out, and nobody was listening to podcasts, it's kind of like what's next for somebody who wants to communicate in this way. And I believe there will be other mediums, but it's more about like, okay, this person has this identity as a brand and they tell this kind of story. Well, they just got to find the medium to tell that story, no matter what it is.
I don't see that ever happening. radio has been a thing for a really long time and is still a very powerful force in media. And, it's one of the oldest forms of communication, mass communication that we have. And it's still going strong. Podcasts, essentially, most podcasts are just new formats of talk radio. That's all it really is. And I think we've proven the viability of both of those mediums. Like, a podcast isn't any different than a radio show. Mm-hmm. It's just the controller's gone away. Now the host can do whatever he wants to do. And I think that's really awesome. But I don't see the bottom ever falling out, because it's not like iTunes does control. They don't control. They are the main source for podcasts. They kind of invented the term podcast,
Correct.
But at the end of the day, iTunes doesn't have full control over my show. Yes, if I got ranked really high on iTunes, my show would do better, of course, because that's where more people are. But if iTunes just goes away tomorrow, people aren't going to stop listening to podcasts. I really believe that.
Yeah, it's taken such a foothold already. Yeah, I agree.
I would never stop. I'm not going to stop listening to podcasts as long as there's good ones to listen to. And I don't see that being a problem at anytime soon.
Yeah.
There's just more and more quality ones popping up all the time. So all that to say is I wouldn't even really worry about that much. I think it's a proven medium. And like I said, iTunes has no control over you or me. If iTunes melts tomorrow, we'll probably still have some listeners. They'll have to figure out a new way to listen, but we'll retain the core people for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. And I've thought a lot about this, and I've kind of come to this conclusion that like when radio's syndicated at some point, like podcast is now like this thing. It's kind of like finding your favorite indie band. Like your people are digging and trying to find this thing that fits this need, and it's kind of like a very like indie music, trying to find something that you like and you want to share it with all your friends. But I kind of see it like if mainstream, if it takes a business model like radio does, like it will eventually, like I could see it being where there are channels of like podcasts that can be like grouped together, kind of like a radio station has like it's formatted where they got this morning show and then they got this afternoon show, and it's like I really see like if they had a way like for the iTunes or whatever medium, like to group things together that were alike, like this one is like this one is not like this one, and people who wanted a certain niche could find it easier. Kind of like it becomes a little bit more mindless activity, kind of like a TV station. People turn on a station that they like and just let it play all day in their house. Right. And I think like if not that we want podcasts to be mindless, but if we take that ability to, people don't have to run down a podcast, like they can kind of mindlessly listen and be entertained by it. I think that will be like podcasts at maturity.
I don't think that podcasting will go that way necessarily, because what people like about if people wanted that, they would just listen to the radio. And like I said, I don't think the radio is going away anytime soon. I think podcast appeals to the same type of people that don't turn the TV on and let it run mindlessly all day. Yeah. We don't really do that here. Like we don't have cable anymore. We just stream everything. Mm-hmm. And so like we were very intentional. Like I want to watch this now, and click. You know what I mean? And same with podcasts. Like I want to listen to this now, and click. Like I think it's a slightly different type of consumer, and I think that type of consumer is becoming more and more common as these technologies kind of evolve. I think more people are wanting a more custom experience than just kind of a steady stream of whatever. Um, and that even shows up in like Pandora algorithms and stuff. It's like, oh yeah, some people do want to turn on a Pandora station, but they turned on their, like my mom, for instance, she loves her Sturgill Simpson Pandora station. She's like, the best stuff ever comes up on that.
Mm-hmm.
So like it could be an algorithm thing like that, where podcasts are kind of streamed in that nature. I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see that. That might even be what Spotify is up to with the way they're shifting to podcast stuff. It could be. They're shifting the way they do podcasts. It's like more obvious that they do podcasts, or that they have podcasts on there, and that could be their move. That could be what they're trying to do, because Spotify will have stream come up for you can make playlists and whatever. You could probably make a playlist out of podcasts, and it would just grab each one from the feed and play it for them. Might play Clifton Worley and Tone Mob and 60 Cycle back to back.
Right.
I think these things will happen. I don't think podcast listeners will ever be the kind that just click it on and just forget about what they're listening to most of the time.
Yeah, and I may have made a mistake in saying that the way I did, but like I see like that as like the 20, 30 years ago, 20 or 30 years from now, when maybe it's like more mainstream, like TV is, or broadcast TV.
I don't even know if we're that far off. I feel like we're more in the 5 to 10 area before podcasts as a whole, and I don't mean any one show, but before podcasts are more accepted the same way that Netflix is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, Netflix is very much mainstream at this point.
Yeah.
Like everyone's got Netflix. Because how else are you gonna watch Ozark?
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of good topic for discussion, and I'd love to hear what the listeners have to say about this, and they can chime in on it there in the group, and I'd love to chat with you guys about it, and I'm sure Blake wouldn't mind joining in the conversation as well.
Of course, I'd love to.
Well, thank you so much, man, and it's been a pleasure, and I hope you have a good evening, man.
Yeah, you too. Take care. I'm going to go eat some tacos.
All right. Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.